ballroom looked perfect that evening. Crystal lights hung from the high ceiling, shining softly over round tables covered in white cloth. Tall glasses sparkled under the light, and fresh flowers filled the air with a gentle scent. Everything had been planned for months. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. This was not just any dinner. It was a very important charity gala hosted by one of the most powerful business leaders in the city. He was known for building companies from nothing and turning them into giants. People respected him. Some even feared him. Tonight, he was welcoming special international guests who were thinking about signing a partnership worth millions. The music was meant to begin at exactly 7 o'clock. A famous pianist had been invited to perform. The performance was supposed to create a calm and elegant mood before the main speech. The timing, the lighting, the order of events, everything had been arranged carefully. Backstage, however, things were starting to fall apart. The pianist suddenly felt dizzy. First, he tried to ignore it. He drank water. He sat down. But within minutes, he became pale and weak. A staff member rushed to his side. Soon, 2 more people gathered around him. Someone called for medical help. Whispers spread quickly behind the curtains. He can't go on. We need another pianist. There is no backup. The event manager felt her hands grow cold. She checked her phone again and again, hoping for a miracle message. There was none. The performance was scheduled to begin in less than 15 minutes. Out in the ballroom, guests were arriving. They laughed politely, shaking hands and greeting one another. They had no idea that a disaster was building just behind the stage. The CEO stood near the entrance, welcoming important visitors. He wore a calm expression, but he was always alert. He noticed small details others missed. When he saw the event manager walking toward him with a worried face, he immediately knew something was wrong. She leaned closer and spoke softly so no one else could hear. There is a problem. The pianist is sick. He cannot perform. For a second, the CEO said nothing. His jaw tightened slightly. He looked toward the stage, where the grand piano waited under a soft golden spotlight. How long until the program begins? He asked quietly. 10 minutes. Find a replacement. We are trying. No one is available. It's too late. He did not panic. He never showed panic in public. But inside he felt the pressure rising. The piano performance was not just background music. It was the emotional opening of the night. The international partners valued culture and presentation. Without it, the evening would feel incomplete, unprofessional. He glanced around the room. Everything looked beautiful on the surface. Yet behind that beauty, chaos was moving fast. Near the service entrance at the back of the ballroom, catering staff moved quietly with trays of drinks and small plates. Among them was a woman in a simple black uniform. She worked long hours at events like this to support her child. She stayed focused, careful not to attract attention. Beside the hallway leading to the staff area stood a little girl, no older than 10. She wore a clean but very simple dress. Her hair was neatly tied back. She held a small notebook against her chest and watched the room with curious eyes. She was not supposed to be inside the main hall, but her mother had no one to leave her with that evening. So she stayed quietly near the back, promised to behave and not disturb anyone. From where she stood, she could see part of the stage. She noticed the piano first. It was large and shiny, almost like something from a dream. She had only seen such pianos in videos or through the glass windows of music stores. Then she noticed the tension. Staff members rushed past her, whispering. One of them said, "The pianist fainted." Another said, "We're finished." She listened carefully. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She looked at her mother, who was adjusting glasses on a tray. "What happened?" she asked softly. Her mother sighed. "The musician is sick. It's not our concern. Stay here. Okay?" The girl nodded, but her eyes drifted back toward the stage. She knew what it meant when music was missing. She understood how silence could feel heavy. At school events, when something went wrong, everyone felt uncomfortable. Music filled empty spaces. Music fixed awkward moments. She looked again at the piano. Then she made a decision that surprised even herself. She stepped closer to the event manager, who was speaking urgently on the phone near the hallway. The manager looked stressed and tired. The girl waited politely until the call ended. In a small but steady voice, she said, "Excuse me." The manager barely looked at her. "Yes? You shouldn't be here. Please go back to your mother." The girl swallowed, but she did not move. "Can you play the piano?" the manager asked someone behind her, still distracted. The girl answered instead, "I can play." The manager froze for a second. Then she finally looked down at the child standing in front of her. "You?" "Yes. If it's very urgent, I can help." The manager almost laughed, but she was too stressed to find it funny. "This is not a school show," she said gently but firmly. "This is a high-level corporate event." "I know," the girl replied. "But you need someone." Her voice was calm, not loud, not proud, just honest. Her mother quickly rushed over, face full of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said to the manager. "She doesn't understand. She just likes music." "I do understand," the girl said quietly. The manager rubbed her forehead. Time was running out. The CEO, who had stepped away from his guests for a moment, noticed the small gathering near the hallway. He walked over, his expression serious but controlled. "What's happening?" he asked. The manager hesitated. She did not want to sound foolish. "She says she can play the piano." The CEO looked at the child. She did not look away. Her hands were slightly shaking, but her eyes were steady. "Can you?" he asked simply. There was no smile on his face, no warmth, just a direct question. "Yes," she answered. "Where did you learn?" "At the community center. And at home." "Have you played on a grand piano before?" She paused for half a second. "Not one this big." Silence filled the small space between them. In the distance, guests were taking their seats. The program was about to begin. The CEO checked his watch. 5 minutes. He could cancel the performance and move straight to speeches. It would look rushed. It would feel wrong. Or he could take a risk. He studied the child again. There was something unusual about her calmness. She did not look like she wanted attention. She looked like she simply wanted to help. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. She nodded. Her mother whispered, "Please, she's just a child." The CEO took a slow breath. "Bring her to the piano," he said. The manager's eyes widened. "Sir, we have no time. If she cannot play, we stop. If she can, the evening is saved." The girl felt her stomach twist, but she stepped forward. As she walked toward the stage, the lights seemed brighter. The room felt larger. Guests turned their heads, confused to see a child approaching the grand piano instead of the famous musician they were expecting. Soft murmurs spread across the tables. Her small shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. Each step felt heavy, yet she kept going. Behind her, her mother stood frozen, unsure whether to be afraid or proud. The CEO moved back toward the front, his expression unreadable. The spotlight above the piano was already on. The girl climbed onto the bench carefully. Her feet barely touched the pedals. She adjusted her position, just like she had practiced many times before on a much smaller keyboard. The ballroom slowly grew quiet. Some guests exchanged amused looks. Others lifted their phones, curious about what was about to happen. The girl placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes. And in that silent second, the entire future of the evening hung in the balance. Her fingers rested on the keys, but she did not press them right away. The silence in the ballroom felt heavy, almost loud. People shifted in their chairs. A few quiet laughs came from the back tables. Some guests thought this must be part of the entertainment. Others looked annoyed. The CEO stood near the front row watching closely. His face showed no emotion, but inside, his thoughts were racing. He had built his reputation by making bold decisions. Still, this one felt different. This was not about numbers or contracts. This was about trust, and he had just placed it in the hands of a child. The event manager stood near the curtains, her hands tightly clasped together. She was already preparing a quick apology speech in her mind in case this went wrong. The little girl took a slow breath. Then she pressed the first key. The sound was soft, clear. It echoed gently through the hall. A few people leaned forward slightly. It did not sound like random noise. It sounded careful. She played another note, then another. Within seconds, a simple melody began to form. It was not rushed. It was not loud. It was steady and smooth. Her small fingers moved with surprising confidence. The laughter stopped. Guests who had been whispering slowly turned their full attention toward the stage. The girl forgot about the crowd after the first few seconds. She forgot about the lights, the expensive suits, the cameras. In her mind, she was somewhere else. She imagined the small room at the community center where she practiced every afternoon. She imagined the old keyboard with 2 chipped keys. She imagined the quiet encouragement she used to hear. Her shoulders relaxed. The melody grew deeper. It was not a famous pop song. It was not something loud and dramatic. It was a gentle classical piece, filled with emotion. The kind of music that makes people feel something without knowing why. The CEO's expression slowly changed. At first, he had been analyzing the situation, ready to step in if needed. But now he was listening, truly listening. The notes were clean. Her timing was steady. There were no signs of panic in her movements. Even when she reached a slightly difficult section, she did not hesitate. Her fingers flowed across the keys naturally. One of the international guests leaned toward another and whispered, "Is she part of the program?" The other guest shook his head slowly, eyes still fixed on the stage. At the back of the room, the girl's mother stood completely still. She had never seen her daughter play in front of so many people. At home, the music filled their small apartment. It was normal there, but here, in this grand hall, it felt unreal. Halfway through the piece, something shifted in the room. It was no longer about surprise. It became about feeling. The music carried warmth, carried something honest. It did not feel practiced for applause. It felt personal. The CEO felt a strange tightness in his chest. He did not understand it at first. He had attended hundreds of events with professional musicians. He had heard world-class performances. But this felt different. He noticed the way her head moved slightly with the rhythm. He noticed how gently she pressed the keys during softer parts, and how confidently she moved into stronger notes. There was no fear on her face now. There was peace. The room was completely silent except for the piano. Even the servers had stopped moving for a moment. The piece began building toward a stronger section. The sound grew fuller. Her small feet tried their best to reach the pedals properly. She adjusted carefully without breaking the flow. One small mistake happened, a slightly uneven note, but she corrected it instantly without panic. Only someone listening very closely would notice. The CEO did notice, and instead of disappointment, he felt respect. She was not perfect. She was real. As the melody continued, memories began to rise in his mind. He remembered being a young boy, sitting quietly in a modest living room. He remembered evenings when someone would sit at an old upright piano and play softly after dinner. He remembered feeling safe during those moments. He had not thought about those evenings in years. Business had replaced them. Meetings had replaced them. Success had replaced them. But now, standing in the middle of a luxury ballroom, surrounded by wealth and ambition, he was suddenly taken back to something much simpler. The music was doing something he did not expect. The final section of the piece approached. It was gentle again like the beginning. Her fingers slowed slightly, giving each note time to breathe. The audience remained completely still. When she pressed the final key, she did not lift her hands immediately. She allowed the last sound to fade naturally into silence. For a brief second, no one moved. Then applause exploded across the ballroom. It was not polite clapping. It was loud, strong, surprised. Some guests even stood up. The girl blinked, almost confused. She had not been thinking about applause. She looked up slowly, as if waking from a dream. The CEO began clapping too. Not out of obligation. Not for show. but because he genuinely wanted to. The event manager felt her knees grow weak with relief. She let out a long breath she did not realize she had been holding. The applause continued longer than expected. The girl carefully stood from the bench. She gave a small, shy bow, just like she had been taught at the community center. From the stage, she searched for her mother in the crowd. When their eyes met, her mother's face was filled with tears and pride. The CEO stepped forward and walked toward the stage. The room quieted again, curious about what he would say. He climbed the few steps slowly and stood beside the piano. For a moment, he simply looked at the child standing next to him. Up close, he could see how small her hands really were. "You saved the evening," he said into the microphone. His voice was steady, but softer than usual. The audience smiled. He then turned slightly toward her and asked, not into the microphone this time, but quietly enough for only those near the stage to hear, "What was the name of that piece?" She hesitated. "I don't know its official name," she admitted honestly. "My father used to play it. He said it was about hope." The CEO felt that tightness in his chest again. "About hope," he repeated slowly. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then he faced the audience again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "sometimes the most unexpected moments become the most meaningful." The crowd responded with another round of applause. But inside, the CEO knew this was more than just a successful performance. Something had shifted in him. He looked at the piano once more, then back at the girl. "Would you mind staying for a few minutes after the program?" he asked gently. She nodded. He stepped away from the stage and returned to his place, but his focus was no longer on business. As the evening program continued with speeches and presentations, many guests kept whispering about the little pianist. Some asked staff about her. Others searched her face in their memory, wondering where she had trained. But she simply returned to her mother's side, holding her notebook again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The CEO delivered his speech later that night with confidence, but there was a different tone in his voice. It was warmer, less rigid. Every now and then, his eyes drifted toward the back of the room where the girl stood quietly. He realized that the night had already become unforgettable. Not because of a business deal, but because of a simple act of courage from someone no one had noticed before. And deep down, he felt that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than a single performance. The rest of the evening moved forward as planned, but it no longer felt the same. The schedule continued, the speeches were delivered, and the guests smiled politely. Yet something had changed in the air. The earlier tension was gone. In its place was a quiet curiosity that seemed to connect everyone in the room. The CEO finished his presentation with confidence, but his mind kept returning to the moment when the little girl had pressed the first key. He had attended hundreds of events over the years. Most of them blended together in his memory. Expensive decorations, important handshakes, careful conversations. But this night felt different, felt human. As the formal part of the program ended, soft background music began to play through the speakers. Guests stood from their seats and began talking in small groups. Some moved toward the buffet tables. Others discussed business in low voices. Laughter slowly returned to the hall. Near the back of the room, the little girl stood beside her mother again. She held her notebook against her chest, as if nothing special had happened. A few staff members walked past her and gave her quiet smiles. One server whispered, "You were amazing." She responded with a shy nod. Her mother knelt down in front of her. Her eyes were still slightly red. "You didn't tell me you could play like that," she said softly. The girl shrugged. "I just played the way I always do." Her mother placed a gentle hand on her cheek. "You were brave." The girl thought for a moment. "I was scared at first," she admitted. "But when I started playing, I forgot about everyone." Across the room, the CEO was finishing a conversation with one of the international guests. The guest spoke warmly about the performance. "That child," the guest said, shaking his head with a smile. "Sometimes raw talent speaks louder than experience." The CEO agreed quietly. "Yes," he replied, "it does." When the conversation ended, He did not return to discussing contracts or numbers. Instead, he scanned the room until he found her. She looked small standing near the tall adults and decorated tables. If someone had walked in at that moment without knowing what had happened, they would never guess that she had just been the center of the evening. He walked toward her slowly. As he approached, her mother immediately stood up straight, unsure of what to expect. "Good evening," he said politely. "Good evening, sir," her mother replied. He looked down at the girl. "Would you mind talking with me for a few minutes?" The girl looked up at her mother for permission. Her mother nodded gently. They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom where the lights were softer and the music from the speakers was low. The CEO crouched slightly so he could speak at her level. It was something he had not done in a long time. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. "Since I was 6, she answered. "Who taught you?" "My father started teaching me. He loved music." There was a brief pause. "And now?" he asked carefully. She lowered her eyes for a second. "Now I practice at the community center. They let me use the keyboard after school." He noticed she did not complain. She did not speak with sadness. She simply stated the facts. "Do you take formal lessons?" She shook her head. "We can't afford them. But I watch videos and practice a lot." Her honesty was simple and direct. The CEO felt something tighten inside him again. He thought about the expensive instruments he had seen in private homes, sometimes untouched for years. He thought about the grand piano on the stage behind them, worth more than some people earned in a lifetime. "Why did you offer to help tonight?" he asked. She thought carefully before answering. "Everyone looked worried," she said. "And I know how it feels when music is missing. It makes everything feel empty." Her words were so simple, yet they carried weight. The CEO studied her face. There was no sign of pride. No expectation of reward. Just sincerity. "Were you afraid?" "Yes," she said honestly. But it felt more scary to stay quiet. He could not help but smile slightly. At that moment, one of the board members approached them. "We're ready for the signing discussion," he said softly to the CEO. The CEO nodded but did not move immediately. "I will join you in a few minutes," he replied. The board member glanced at the girl with curiosity, then walked away. The CEO turned back to her. "Do you dream of becoming a pianist?" he asked. Her eyes brightened for the first time. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want to play on big stages one day. I want people to feel something when I play." He noticed the difference in her voice when she spoke about music. It was stronger, more alive. "And if that doesn't happen?" he asked gently. She shrugged again, but this time with a small smile. "Then I will still play, even if it's just for myself." That answer stayed with him. Across the ballroom, guests were gathering around a long table where documents were being prepared for signing. Cameras were being set up. This was the moment the evening had been built around. Yet the CEO felt that the real highlight had already passed. He stood up slowly. "I have to attend to some business now," he said. "But I would like you and your mother to stay until the end." Her mother quickly responded, "Of course, sir." He hesitated for a brief second, then added, "Thank you, not just for the performance, for your courage." The girl nodded quietly. As he walked away, he felt lighter than he had at the beginning of the night. The signing ceremony went smoothly. The international partners expressed admiration for the event. They spoke not only about business potential but also about the warmth of the evening. "One thing I have learned," one of them said during the discussion, "is that leadership is not only about strength. It is about heart." The CEO listened carefully. When the contracts were finally signed, applause filled the room once again. Cameras flashed. Smiles were exchanged. But through it all, his thoughts returned to a small pair of hands moving confidently across piano keys. Later, as guests began to leave, the ballroom slowly emptied. Staff members started clearing tables and collecting glasses. The grand piano remained under the spotlight, now quiet again. The girl stood near it once more, looking at it thoughtfully. The CEO approached her for the second time that night. "Would you like to play one more piece?" he asked. She looked surprised. "Now?" Yes, no audience this time. Just the empty room. She glanced at her mother, who nodded with encouragement. She climbed onto the bench again. The hall was mostly empty now. Only a few staff members remained, moving quietly in the background. She began to play. This time the melody was different, softer, more personal. Without the pressure of a crowd, her playing felt even more natural. The sound echoed gently through the large space, bouncing off the high ceilings. The CEO stood alone a few steps away, listening. There were no cameras, no applause waiting, just music. And in that quiet moment he understood something clearly. Success had given him power. It had given him respect. But it had slowly taken away small, meaningful moments like this. As the final notes faded into the empty hall, he made a silent decision. This would not be the last time he heard her play, and this would not be the end of her story. The night that had begun with panic and fear had turned into something unexpected. Not just a successful business event, but the beginning of a connection that neither of them fully understood yet. The ballroom was almost empty now. The bright conversations from earlier had faded into soft echoes as staff members folded tablecloths and carried trays back to the kitchen. The large doors near the entrance were open, letting in cool night air. Outside, cars were pulling away one by one. The grand piano still stood under the soft light, looking calm and silent after everything that had happened. The little girl remained near the stage, running her fingers gently along the smooth edge of the instrument, careful not to disturb anyone. Her mother was helping gather a few leftover items from a side table, but her eyes kept drifting back to her daughter. Across the room, the CEO stood alone for a moment. The board members had left. The international guests had shaken his hand and thanked him again for the memorable evening. Everything had gone well. The partnership was secure. Yet he was not thinking about the signed documents. He was thinking about a memory that had returned without warning. When he was young, before success and long meetings became his daily life, there had been an old upright piano in a small living room. It had not been expensive. Some of its keys were slightly uneven, but in the evenings, it filled the house with warmth. His mother used to sit there after dinner. She would play soft melodies while he finished his homework on the table nearby. Sometimes she would pause and ask him to listen closely to a certain part. She would say, "Music is not about being loud. It is about being honest." He had forgotten those words. Life had moved fast. Responsibilities had grown heavy. When his mother passed away years ago, he buried himself in work. He convinced himself that success would make her proud. And maybe it did. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening to music the way he once had. Tonight, when the little girl played that simple piece about hope, something inside him opened again. He walked slowly toward the stage. She noticed him approaching and stepped back politely. "Sir," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know," he began, "that the melody you played earlier reminded me of someone very important to me?" She shook her head gently. "My mother used to play something very similar," he continued. "I have not heard that feeling in many years." The girl listened carefully. She did not interrupt. "When you played," he said, his voice quieter than before, "it felt like time slowed down." She thought about that. "Music can do that," she replied simply. Her answer made him smile again. Her mother walked closer, unsure if she should give them privacy or stand beside her child. The CEO turned to her. "You have a remarkable daughter," he said sincerely. "Thank you," her mother replied, her voice filled with both pride and humility. "She practices every day, even when she is tired." The CEO nodded. "Talent is important, but discipline is rare." He looked back at the girl. "What do you need most right now to grow as a musician?" The question surprised both of them. The girl hesitated. She was not used to being asked such serious things. "A better piano," she admitted quietly. "The one at the center is old. Some keys don't sound right." Her mother quickly added, "But we are grateful for what we have." The CEO raised his hand gently. "There is nothing wrong with wanting better tools to improve. He turned his eyes toward the grand piano on stage. "Do you know how much this piano costs?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "It costs more than a small apartment," he said calmly. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "And yet," he continued, "tonight, it was not the piano that impressed everyone. It was you." The girl looked down at her hands. He could see that she did not fully understand the impact she had made. And maybe that was what made it even more powerful. One of the senior staff members approached carefully. "Sir, the final reports are ready for your review. I will look at them tomorrow," he replied without hesitation. The staff member seemed surprised but nodded and stepped away. The CEO then faced the girl and her mother again. "I want to ask you something," he said. Both of them waited. "Would you allow me to support her education?" Silence fell between them. Her mother blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Support how?" "Formal lessons, proper instrument, opportunities to perform, whatever she needs to develop her gift." The girl looked up quickly at her mother. Her mother's eyes filled with emotion again. "Sir, that is too generous. We cannot accept such a big favor." "It is not a favor," he replied gently. "It is an investment. In talent, in courage." The girl's voice was small but clear. "Why would you do that for me?" He paused before answering. "Because tonight, you reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said honestly. "And because talent should not depend on money." Her mother covered her mouth for a moment, overwhelmed. The girl looked thoughtful. "If you help me," she said carefully, "I promise I will work very hard." He nodded. "I do not doubt that." There was no dramatic music playing now. No crowd watching. Just 3 people standing near a silent piano. But this quiet moment carried more meaning than the loud applause earlier. The CEO reached into his jacket and handed her mother a simple business card. "Call this number tomorrow," he said. "My assistant will arrange everything." Her mother accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. The girl stepped forward slightly. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. He felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "I should be the one thanking you," he replied. A few final staff members turned off some of the overhead lights, leaving only the stage area illuminated. The hall now looked peaceful, almost empty. The CEO glanced once more at the piano. "You know," he said softly, "my mother once told me that music keeps the heart soft, even when the world tries to make it hard." The girl smiled gently. "She sounds wise." "She was," he said. He looked at the two of them standing together, a mother who worked long hours and a daughter who carried quiet determination. For years, he had donated to large charities. He had funded programs with impressive titles. But tonight felt different. This was not about writing a check and moving on. This felt personal. As they walked toward the exit together, the cool night air greeted them outside the building. City lights shimmered in the distance. Cars passed by, unaware that something life-changing had just begun inside the grand hall. Before stepping into his car, the CEO turned one last time. "Keep playing," he said. "I will," she answered. He watched as she and her mother walked toward the bus stop at the end of the street. They did not look like people who had just experienced something extraordinary. They looked simple, ordinary, but he knew better. As his car drove away, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he did not think about the next meeting or the next deal. He thought about music, and he realized that sometimes the most urgent question, "Can you play the piano?" can lead to an answer that changes more than just an evening, can change a heart, and maybe even a future. The next morning did not feel ordinary for either of them. In a small apartment across the city, the little girl woke up earlier than usual. For a few seconds, she wondered if the previous night had been a dream. The bright lights, the large piano, the applause. It all felt distant now compared to the quiet sound of traffic outside her window. She sat up in bed and looked at her hands. They were the same hands as yesterday. Small, slightly dry from the winter air. Nothing magical about them. From the kitchen, she could hear her mother moving around, preparing a simple breakfast before work. There was no grand ballroom now, no cameras, just the familiar smell of tea and toast. She walked into the kitchen slowly. Her mother turned and smiled, but there was something different in her eyes, a mix of excitement and worry. "Did you sleep well?" her mother asked. "A little," the girl replied honestly. "I kept thinking about what he said." Her mother nodded. On the small table lay the business card that had been handed to them the night before. It looked simple, clean, but it carried a weight that felt almost too big. What if it was just something he said in the moment? The girl asked quietly. Her mother picked up the card and held it gently. "We will find out," she said. Later that morning, after dropping her daughter at school, her mother stepped outside and dialed the number with trembling fingers. The call was answered quickly. A calm voice confirmed that they had been expecting her call. An appointment was scheduled for the afternoon at the company office. When the girl returned home from school and heard the news, her heart beat faster. "Do I have to play again?" she asked. "No," her mother said with a soft laugh. "I think they just want to talk." The office building was tall and modern. Its glass walls reflected the sky like a mirror. As they walked inside, the girl felt smaller than she had the night before. The lobby was quiet and bright. People moved quickly, holding folders and tablets. Everything felt serious. They were guided to a conference room on one of the upper floors. After a few minutes, the CEO entered. He was dressed formally, as always, but his expression was different from the night of the gala. It was warmer. "I'm glad you came," he said. They sat down together at a long table. "I spoke with a few music instructors this morning," he began. "One of the best piano teachers in the city has agreed to meet with you this week." The girl's eyes widened. "He has trained professional musicians for years," the CEO continued. "But more importantly, he believes in teaching children who truly love music." The girl swallowed. "Will he be very strict?" The CEO smiled slightly. "Probably. But that is not a bad thing." Her mother listened quietly, still unsure how all of this was happening so quickly. "There is something else," the CEO added. He opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a full scholarship agreement. It covers lessons, competition entries, travel expenses if needed, and a new instrument for your home." Her mother stared at the paper. "This is too much," she whispered. "It is not too much," he replied calmly. "It is what talent deserves." The girl looked from the document to the CEO. "Why are you doing all of this for me?" she asked again. He leaned back slightly, thinking about how to answer in simple words. "When I was your age," he said slowly, "someone believed in me, not with money, but with encouragement. That support changed my life. I built my success step by step, but I never forgot that someone once saw potential in a young boy who had nothing impressive yet." He paused. "Last night, I saw that same potential in you." The room grew quiet. The girl felt a strange mix of excitement and responsibility. This was no longer just about playing for fun. Felt bigger. "What if I fail?" she asked honestly. The CEO shook his head gently. "Failure is part of growth. The only real failure is never trying." Her mother reached for her hand under the table. After reviewing the details carefully, they agreed. Within a week, a beautiful upright piano was delivered to their apartment. It was not as large as the one at the gala, but it was brand new. Its keys were smooth and even. The sound was rich and clear. When the delivery team finished setting it up, the girl stood in front of it quietly. She touched one key. The sound filled the small room instantly. Her mother covered her mouth, holding back tears again. "It's really ours?" the girl asked. "Yes," her mother replied. From that day forward, her routine changed. After school, instead of going directly to the community center, she began attending lessons with the new instructor. He was serious but kind. He corrected her posture. He adjusted her hand positions. He introduced her to more complex pieces. At first, it was overwhelming. Some days she returned home frustrated. The music felt harder than before. There were moments when she missed the simple freedom of playing whatever she wanted. But each time she felt discouraged, She remembered the night of the gala. She remembered standing under bright lights, feeling afraid but choosing to play anyway. And she kept practicing. The CEO occasionally received updates from the instructor. Short messages. She is dedicated. She learns quickly. She listens carefully. He found himself looking forward to those updates more than to quarterly reports. Months passed. One afternoon, he attended a small student recital where she was scheduled to perform. This time, the hall was modest. Parents filled the seats. Children waited nervously for their turn. When she walked onto the stage, she did not look as small as she had at the gala. She looked focused. She began to play. The piece was more advanced now. It required control and strength. There were faster sections, deeper emotion. She made one small mistake halfway through. But she did not stop. She continued smoothly, her confidence stronger than before. The CEO watched quietly from the back row. He noticed something important. She was not playing to impress him. She was playing for herself. After the recital, she ran toward her mother, smiling. "You did well," the CEO said when she approached. "I made a mistake," she replied. "Yes," he agreed. "And you handled it." She thought about that. That evening, as he drove home, he realized that supporting her had changed him too. He had started a new initiative within his company, a program to identify and sponsor talented children from low-income families, not just in music, but in art, science, and sports. He named it after his mother. It was no longer about one performance. It had become a mission. Back in the small apartment, the girl sat at her new piano and practiced again, even after the long day. Her fingers moved more confidently now. She was still the same child who had stood near the back of a ballroom and offered to help. But her world was expanding. And somewhere across the city, a CEO who once measured success only in numbers was learning to measure it in something else. In courage, in opportunity, in the quiet power of believing in someone when it matters most. Years did not pass all at once. They moved slowly, one practice session at a time. The little girl who once stood nervously under a bright spotlight continued to grow, not only taller but stronger in her music. Her hands stretched wider across the keys now. The pieces she practiced became more complex. Some days were smooth and full of progress. Other days were frustrating, filled with repeated mistakes and tired fingers. But she did not stop. The new piano in their apartment became more than an instrument. It became part of their daily life. In the evenings, soft melodies flowed through the open windows. Neighbors began to recognize the sound. Sometimes they paused in the hallway just to listen for a few seconds before continuing on their way. Her mother still worked long hours, but something had changed in her posture. She walked with a little more confidence, knowing her daughter had opportunities she once thought were impossible. The CEO kept his promise quietly. He never tried to control her path. He simply made sure the doors remained open. When she needed to travel for a competition, the arrangements were handled. When she required advanced training, it was organized without hesitation. But he did something else too. He attended important moments. Not every small recital, not every class performance. He respected her space. But when she was invited to perform at a citywide youth music competition 3 years after that first gala night, he sat in the audience once again. This time, the venue was larger. The stage lights were brighter. The audience was filled with music teachers, critics, and families. Backstage, she felt nervous. Not the kind of fear that makes someone freeze, but the kind that reminds you something matters. Her instructor stood beside her. "Remember," he said calmly, "play the story, not just the notes." She nodded. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with steady steps. She no longer looked like the small child who needed to adjust the bench carefully. She moved with quiet confidence. She sat down, closed her eyes for a brief second, and began. The piece she chose was powerful. It started softly, then built into strong, emotional sections. Her fingers moved with control. She understood the pauses now. She understood when to hold back and when to let the sound fill the hall. In the middle of the performance, there was a moment of complete silence between phrases. In that silence, she remembered the first time she had ever played in front of a large crowd. She remembered the fear. She remembered the simple question, "Can you play?" And she realized how far she had come. When she pressed the final chord, it rang clearly across the room. The audience stood almost immediately. The applause was loud and long. But what mattered most was not the volume of clapping. It was the feeling inside her chest. She felt proud, not because she was perfect, but because she had worked for this moment. Later that evening, when the results were announced, she received first place in her age category. Her mother cried openly this time, not caring who saw. The CEO felt his eyes grow warm again, just like they had years before. After the ceremony, she approached him with the trophy in her hands. "I didn't play just for the judges," she said softly. "I played for the little girl I used to be." He smiled. "That is exactly why you won." But the story did not end with a trophy. As she entered her teenage years, the music became deeper. She began composing small pieces of her own. Some were inspired by the busy streets outside her apartment. Others were inspired by memories of her father teaching her simple scales when she was very young. One afternoon, she visited the office building again, not as a nervous child but as a confident young musician. The CEO had invited her to perform at the annual gala once more, the same event where everything had started. This time there was no emergency. Her name was printed clearly in the program as the featured pianist of the evening. When she walked into the grand ballroom, she paused for a moment near the entrance. The room looked the same, crystal lights, elegant tables, important guests. But she felt different. She turned to the CEO who stood beside her. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently. "A little," she admitted, "but not scared." "That is good," he said. "Stay a little nervous. It keeps you honest." When the lights dimmed and the spotlight found the grand piano, she walked onto the stage with steady confidence. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began. The piece she played that night was her own composition. It started with a soft, hopeful melody, similar to the one she had played years ago. Then it grew stronger, fuller, reflecting growth and resilience. There were moments of tension, followed by calm resolution. As the music filled the ballroom, conversations stopped completely. The CEO stood near the front, listening carefully. He could hear not only skill but experience in her playing now. He could hear the years of practice, the discipline, the patience. And he could hear something else too. Gratitude. When the final notes faded, the applause was powerful. But this time, she did not bow shyly. She stood tall. Later, during his speech, the CEO addressed the audience. "Years ago," he said, "an unexpected moment changed my understanding of leadership. I learned that sometimes the greatest potential stands quietly in the background, waiting only for a chance." He did not share every detail. He did not need to. Everyone in the room could see the result standing beside the piano. After the event ended, as guests slowly left the hall, she approached him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For asking me if I could play." He shook his head gently. "You were the one who offered." They both smiled. Outside, the night air felt familiar, just like it had years before. But now, instead of walking toward a bus stop, she stepped into a car that would take her to an early morning rehearsal for an international youth orchestra audition. Her journey was still unfolding. The CEO watched her leave with a sense of quiet pride. He knew she would continue far beyond what anyone had expected that first night. And as for him, his company's foundation had now supported dozens of young talents. Musicians, artists, students with big dreams and limited resources. Each time he met one of them, he remembered a simple moment near a hallway in a ballroom. A small voice saying, "I can play." It had been urgent that night. But in truth, it was more than urgent. It was life-changing. Not only for a little girl with brave hands, but for a man who had forgotten how powerful a single opportunity could be. And every time she sat at a piano now, whether in a small classroom or a grand concert hall, she carried that first memory with her. The memory of choosing courage over silence. The memory of turning fear into music. and the understanding that sometimes all it takes to change a future is one question, and the courage to answer it.